Shalom, everybody. I am here with Gol Kalev, who is the author of Judaism 3.0, a book that got a lot of really, really exciting press here in Israel. And I immediately had to have a copy, and I'm so glad that I bought it because I have learned so much from your book. And Gol, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, first of all. I know that you had a Wall Street background. You're from Israel, but you also lived in the United States. So give everybody a little bit of a background. Who are we talking to?
Sure. I'm from Israel, third generation from Tel Aviv, and served in the military as everybody else here in Israel. And after that, I went to study in the States. I did my MBA, and I thought I'll stay in the States for a year or two to get some work experience, but that year or two have turned into much longer. I lived in New York for many years, working on Wall Street as an investment banker, also doing a lot of deals in Europe, and really, it's a global, investment banking is a global field. But I always wanted to go back to Israel, and I've done that. And when I came back to Israel, I moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, where I am right now. So I've been living in Jerusalem for the last few years and loving every moment.
Wow. So you made Aliyah. You went up from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
And that is the most difficult Aliyah to make because, as I'm sure some of your viewers know, there is sort of this discrepancy between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. When you live in Tel Aviv, you think you're a little bit scared of Jerusalem. It represents something that maybe you're not as comfortable with. And also there is the media portrays Jerusalem as terrorism and a lot of conflict and things like that. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't an obvious thing for me to do, but I was fortunate enough to have a few people that convinced me to try Jerusalem out. And I took an Airbnb and tried it a few times and eventually moved here full time. And it is the most interesting aspect, I think, of my move to Jerusalem is the reaction of some of my Tel Avivi friends who don't completely understand it, but then they come and visit, and they visit more and more and more. And then some of them are also contemplating making Aliyah from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem as well now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really fascinating. There is a big divide between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. A lot of people from Tel Aviv don't visit Jerusalem, and people from Jerusalem don't visit Tel Aviv. And I think that you're identifying a lot of important trends. And so let's talk about your book, Judaism's Transformation to Zionism, Judaism 3.0. So what is the transformation that is happening today?
Yeah, so I think we are in the middle of a shift of global consciousness of what Judaism is. Very similar to what we had 2,000 years ago or so. When Judaism, the original Judaism was anchored in the temple, in the ritual of the sacrifices, and in the physical presence in Judea. Everybody agrees about that. That's the biblical narrative, but also historical and archaeological findings that confirm it. When the temple was destroyed and the ritual of sacrifices ceased, and the Jews were exiled, first from Zion, from Jerusalem, and then from Judea, Judaism went through a transformation, which took a long time. It didn't happen overnight. It took centuries. But there was a shift of the global consciousness of what Judaism is. It was not about the temple, but through the practice through the synagogues, and not about the sacrifices, but through the structural prayers. And you had the Jewish law, the halacha, and the canonization of the oral Torah, and rituals. And the physical presence in Zion was replaced by a yearning to go back to Zion, which became a staple of Judaism 2.0. It was really anchored in two things. One is the internal glue of religiosity and an external glue of complete insularity. And that's what Judaism for those 2,000 years in exile. So there was then a shift of what Judaism is. And I think now there's another shift.
So let me just catch up with you for a moment. Judaism 1.0 was biblical Judaism.
Yes.
And then there was a shift to Judaism 2.0, rabbinic Judaism.
Right. It was the Judaism that was practiced in the exile, which was anchored by rabbinic Judaism was its organizing principle, meaning what we kind of simplistically would call the religious aspect of Judaism. Jews until 200 years, virtually all Jews were religiously observant to one degree or another. The structure of the Jewish village or the Jewish neighborhood or ghetto in European cities was around the synagogue and around Shabbat, and the time-wise around Shabbat and the holidays. only over the last 200 years, and mostly over the last 100 years, there was a receding in religiosity. So Judaism for those 2,000 years was anchored in the religiosity of Rabbinic Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism is basically what we think of Judaism today. It wasn't what you thought of Judaism during Judaism 1.0, but as I mentioned, the synagogues and the prayers and the canonization of the oral Torah, all of those replaced the previous version of Judaism. And after a few centuries, it became accepted that this is Judaism. Rabbinic Judaism is what Judaism, and that was very relevant where virtually all the Jews were religious.
Right. So things changed, right? Things changed. And now what is Judaism 3.0?
So Judaism 3.0 is the current state of Judaism that I'm arguing that's already happening, and we just need to kind of call it and recognize it. But just like there was a transformation back then, because the temple was no longer relevant because it was destroyed and so were the sacrifice and the physical presence in Judea, now, whether we like it or not, there is a dramatic receding in religiosity in Judaism over the last 100 years. If nearly 100% of Jews were religious or religiously observant during those 2,000 years of exile, now the surveys are saying that 10-15% of Jews are religiously observant. And so it's no longer can be the organizing principle of Judaism. But on the other hand, the national aspect of the Jewish nation religion has been dramatically increased because we have the state of Israel. And after 70 some years, it's become the most relevant aspect of Judaism. People relate to Jews and to Judaism through Israel and more broadly through the national aspect of Judaism, which is Zionism. So you have
fascinating.
So Judaism has always been, which is sometimes we forget, but until 100, 200 years ago, it was obvious to everybody that the Jews are a nation religion. They were both a nation. A Jew in Spain was a Jew, was not Spanish. Or some people some of my friends in America like to say I'm Polish. Jewish friends said I'm Polish, but you were not Polish when you were in Poland 100 years ago. You were a Jew by your own self-definition. You were certainly a Jew by the definition of the people around you. You were always part of the Jewish nation. So the Judaism has always been a nation religion. So Judaism 3.0 is basically the recognition that we're having a shift now in the organizing principle of Judaism from the religious aspect that held us together over the last 2,000 years to the national aspect, which is Zionism, which is the relevant aspect of Judaism today. And that happens without any compromises to the religious aspects. Actually, it's as I explained in the book, it increases the ability to be more religion and it augments the religious aspect of Judaism. But we also have to understand that both the way that people relate to Judaism and the way that Jews relate to Judaism is not primarily through the synagogue and the religious aspect of Judaism. It is through Israel now.
So are you saying that, singing Hatikvah or wearing an Israeli flag, or are those expressions of Judaism 3.0?
Absolutely. It's an expression of Judaism. And so is criticism of Israel that a lot of my American friends are engaging. For a lot of my friends in the United States, the primary contact point with Judaism is criticism of Israel, meaning they don't go to synagogue and they don't keep Shabbat and they don't eat kosher. And they don't think of the Holocaust anymore as they did maybe 30 years ago when their grandmothers, Holocaust survivors, were alive and very present in their life. They meet their Judaism, many of them, when they read an article about the New York Times about the settlements, or they're upset about the government, or we have a conflict in Gaza. That's when I hear from many of my Jewish friends, or anybody hears about Judaism. They meet their Judaism through Israel in the positive or in the negative. Also in the positive, when they, you don't, the average Jew doesn't, watch, especially young Jew, Yentl and Fiddler on the Roof, but is into watching Israeli Netflix series like Fauda and Shtisel. So whether it's in the positive or in the negative, I'm showing in the book how there is this transformation of Judaism and Zionism and Israel, which is the geographic representative of the physical representation of Zionism, is becoming its anchor.
So what's really interesting, especially for a lot of our viewers who are not Jewish, is a lot of non-Jews aren't necessarily connected to Judaism 2.0 because they go to church. Judaism 2.0 was celebrated in a synagogue, and they go to church, and therefore there wasn't a natural way for non-Jews to connect to Judaism. How should non-Jews understand Judaism their relationship to Judaism 3.0?
So that's very. So I have a chapter that talks about trends in Christianity and how it relates to it. And the book has only been out for a month and a half or so, but in some of the reactions I've been getting from Christian readers, is exactly this is the vehicle to be able to relate back to Judaism, to be able to get close to Judaism, because one of the things that I hear from my Christian friends is that there is a trend that they want to understand Jesus better. They want to understand the life of Jesus as a Jew who was part of the Jewish nation. And when Judaism was when the national aspect of Judaism was suppressed, and people were saying, okay, Judaism is a religion, then you're exactly right. There is not this natural, it's very difficult to relate to Judaism through an aspect of Judaism that developed after Jesus's time, and that is not, inclusive of non-Jews. Judaism 3.0, the recognition that it's the national aspect of Judaism, which is the anchor of Judaism, allows Christians to get closer and closer to Judaism and Jews, while staying Christians and without trying to convert the Jews. It is a more natural connecting point to Judaism, both in terms of the Christian history and theology, understanding Jesus and that time, and the natural affinity that Christians have to Jews and to Israel, through Zionism.
So how does that work, practically speaking? Does a person who is very connected to Judaism 3.0 more than they were connected to Judaism 2.0, are you suggesting that they be referred to as Jewish?
No. We have a great organization here in Jerusalem, Friends of Zion. It's a global organization, but Friends of Zion don't say that I am a member of the Israelite of Zion or of the Israel. Friends of the Jews are not Jews. Friends, I can be friends with your family, but I don't say that I'm a member of your family. Judaism and Christianity are obviously sister religion that are, intertwined in so many touch points. It's a very similar, the faith in God and the key concepts, are very common. And certainly in America, that is anchored in the Judeo-Christian values, that comes around, very, very strongly. So the fact that you have a more relatable, if you recognize that we are in Judaism 3.0, you have a more relatable way to look at Judaism, but it doesn't mean that you're joining Judaism. It doesn't mean that by being, understanding Judaism, being close to it, that you're part of it. And even more so, once you accept, as we always have, that Judaism is a nation. We always accept that Judaism is a nation, but over the last 100 years, there's been an attempt to denationalize the Jewish nation religion, mostly in the United States, and reduce Judaism to a religion. But once you come back and says, wait a minute, Judaism is, a nation, and not from a political point of view, but a technological nation, as I'm saying in Judaism 3.0, then you can be a friend of that nation, a friend of Judaism, without joining it. It actually protects it's clear that if you're, a Christian person who's a Zionist and loves Jews and maybe even, prays in churches or houses of worships that incorporate elements of Judaism, then you're still not considering yourself to be part of the Jewish nation, because, the Jews are their own kind of entity. So Judaism is not a concept that somebody can sort of relate to and say, okay, well, I'm into this general concept, so I'll self-define myself as a Jew. What I'm reiterating in this book, and I think it's timely because there is a discussion in this day and age about what are the walls. Now that the walls are very fluid. Judaism is a nation religion, and I think Judaism 3.0 is a better construct to be friends of Jews, to be supporters of Jews through the national aspect of Judaism, which is Zionism.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. That is very interesting. In terms of, you're not only calling out a new category or recognizing a transformation that is happening. I think that there's a lot of really relevant lessons that that people need to take, and especially for myself, I just a year ago, when there was all of the missiles from Gaza, right? And now there's been a lot of terror attacks recently. And the people who have been pro-Israel in the past are not necessarily sure how to react, right? And you have some of the more traditional communities who are used to looking at the world in a certain way, right, are limited in their response. So, what's the lesson for the criticism of Israel, and what is on the flip side, what is the lesson for those who want to support Israel from Judaism 3.0?
Yeah, so one of the things I do in the book is I tie the original vision of Theodor Herzl to today's realities. Theodor Herzl was the visionary of Zionism, and thanks to him, we're really here today because, for 2,000 years, the Jews prayed and yearned to come back, but didn't really do anything substantial. Herzl realized that that's the primary problem of Judaism. It's not as bad as the persecution and the continuous murders of Jews throughout the centuries were. He said that's not the primary problem. The primary problem is that we're not organized as a nation, as a political entity, and that's why he founded Zionism and passed what's known as the Basel Plan, meaning the program to come back, for the return of the Jews to their land, with the agreement of the international community, and that is exactly what happened. So one of the things that Herzl did is at his time, Europe was becoming very quickly secular. And until the 18th century or so, the opposition to Judaism was expressed in religious language. So one of the most known thing is that the accusation that the Jews use the blood of Christian children for religious rituals, mostly to prepare Passover matzahs during Passover, and other aspects, obviously. So once there was Europe became secular, everybody says, okay, there is no more Jew hatred. If you think that Europe hates, that Europeans hate the Jews, then you are a primitive and you are paranoid and it doesn't exist anymore. Mm-hmm. Very few people realized that there is a new form of opposition to Judaism, and the hate just switches forms based on changing European circumstances and Jewish circumstances. So in the 19th century, in the end of the 19th century, the Jews were emancipated, they had rights. All of a sudden you saw them in your cafes and you saw them elsewhere. And the opposition to Judaism shifted to national hatred of Judaism, and that is a new term that became around that time, which is antisemitism. That's exactly what Herzl identified, that the opposition, it doesn't matter what we do and how we do. It doesn't matter if we even don't go to the cafes or don't take the jobs of Europeans or try to look more like Europeans. It doesn't matter. The opposition, which it's European because the Jews were mostly in Europe, and that's where the opposition to Judaism originally came from. The opposition will chase us no matter where we are, and this is exactly what we're seeing today, because all of a sudden, the call in Europe in the early 20th century was Jews out, Jews go back to Palestine. Go back home to where you came from. Palestine was only later used, as the national movement of the Arabs here. But so Jews came here, and now the opposition is through our defense, our right to defend ourselves here on the one hand, and it's also using contemporary terms that are fashionable in the world now. So it's not religious. The world is secular. So it's human rights and it's things like that, and that's why we see those horrendous blood libels, basically, that are, that Israel commits genocide and Israel is engaged in ethnic cleansing and all kinds of other lies that get official, certificates from presumably reputable organizations like Amnesty most recently. So to answer, this is a long way of answering your question, that we have to recognize that there is a built-in opposition to Judaism that's not going to go away. And now it's funneled through Zionism and through Israel, which is another way to kind of supporting that data, if you will, that we are in Judaism 3.0, because that's how the opposition is coming at us, and specifically through Israel bashing. It's like very, very fashionable to bash Israel, and it's to talk about the occupation, or to talk about this, or to talk about that, whatever it is in your social circles, whatever the terminology of the of that news cycle is, it becomes like a social code of conduct. So when the example you mentioned about a year ago, when we had hundreds of missiles fired indiscriminately into Israel, killing Israeli citizens, Arabs and Jews alike, and Christians too, one would imagine that the world will unite behind us and says how wonderful it is, how we were behind you, and wonderful that you have the ability to defend yourself. And it is something that we have to take very, very seriously. The fact that the poison that has been spread against Israel, against the Jewish state, really against Judaism through this vehicle, accusation that the court mandated eviction of 8 Palestinian families amounts to ethnic cleansing. You couldn't argue this. This became facts, or our right, I think, and duty to intercept the missiles coming out of Gaza amounts to genocide. People don't read behind the headlines, and they live in their social circles. So that became dogmatic. And more broadly from that, you're taking it to the next step. It says, well, wait a minute, it's not just what you're doing in Gaza, it's who you are. It's this, Israel has no right to exist to begin with. You stole this land, and there's all kinds of revisionist histories to cater to the narrative. You have no right to exist. The Zionism is racism and occupationalism and all that kind of thing. There's a new sort of neo-religion of occupationalism, of trying to which many Westerns hijack the Palestinian cause, and whatever it is, they use they package it in their own terms and use it as a currency to oppose Israel and Zionism. So all of a sudden, Israel and Zionism is now a dirty word in certain circles, in the same way that Judaism was a dirty word in certain European circles about 100 years ago. So so once you recognize that Judaism is transformed, and we are in Judaism 3.0, then you cannot hide behind this false pretense that you love the Jews and have nothing against the Jews, but you hate the Zionists. So,
right.
Once there's a recognition of what I'm saying in the book, that Zionism is the organizing principle of Judaism, then Israel bashing is synonymous with Jew bashing. And that changes the nature of the threat, obviously.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you're making a lot of strong points, and I definitely agree with your premise. I'm just trying to want to conclude our interview on a positive note, and because it's not only about playing defense, right? And It's not only a more effective way of combating the anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism, but tell us a little bit about the future hopeful, optimistic, powerful message of Judaism 3.0.
So my book is basically, the first maybe 2/3 is making the case that we are in Judaism 3.0 by doing analysis of trends in America, trends in Israel, trends around the world. How do people look at Jews? But then the last part of the book is what does it mean? What are the implications, both in terms of threats, addressing the contemporary threats to Judaism, which we just discussed, and both in terms of unleashing opportunities that will come out once there is this Jewish clarity, once there's this recognition that we are in Judaism 3.0. Because I mentioned Herzl, he understood that the world will accept the Jewish state and love the Jewish state, not out of some duty or even some moral obligation, but out of their own interests, that the Jewish state will enrich humanity. And that is exactly what is happening today. Innovations that are produced here in Israel save millions of lives around the world, whether it's in Africa addressing famine by turning air into water, or through medical innovations and telemedicine and all kinds of other ways. But a lot of that is clouded both by the opposition to Israel. So somebody might have somebody might produce a great technology that will save lives of people. But the world might say, wait a minute, was that technology produced beyond the Green Line, in East Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem? And once there is this there's more clarity that it was produced. This is the we say that there is the Jews should be a light upon the nation. the Jews should engage in tikkun olam. That tikkun olam is done through Zionism. It's coming from Israel. The light that is emanating from Zion affects the life of people around the world, advances humanity, and this is something, by the way, that our Arab neighbors now recognize. And look what's been happening over the last 2 years alone. The Abrams Accord, which was almost unthinkable 4 years ago, changed the whole narrative of the Middle East. And once we had peace that was brokered by the Trump administration with Bahrain, with the UAE, with Morocco, it wasn't just like a cold peace. Okay, we're not going to have war. All of a sudden, you had people from Dubai coming here. We're going there. There's friendship. There's business partnerships. People, the Arabs recognize that there is, they want to benefit from the light that's coming out of Zion, and they want to be partaking that, and we want them to partake in that and be friends with that. Once there's a recognition we're in Judaism 3.0, the rest of the world, I think, we want to do the same. The lack of clarity or this confusion or this opposition to Judaism through Zionism will, I hope, somewhat subside, and people will allow Judaism to advance humanity through Zionism.
Well, thank you, Gol. And just let us know, where can we get the book?
You can get the book on Amazon and in stores, and you can go to the book's website, which is judaism-zionism.com. And there's you can get up to date on the events that we're doing and on webinars, and also like places where you can buy the book, and also there's a way to express your views back, both in terms of Amazon writing reviews and things like that, but also on our website. There's part of the idea is to steer a conversation, and to certainly feel free to send your comments. It's judaism-zionism.com.
Beautiful. Well, thank you, Gol, for joining us. And thank you for putting out this really thoughtful book. I encourage everybody who's thinking about Israel in a sophisticated kind of way, in a thoughtful way, to check out Judaism 3.0.
Thank you.